All right, how you doing there? It's Keith Hayden, the digital novelist, here with this video on world building for my course. And I thought, what better way to, I just realized I've covered my hand over this. What better way to make a video about world building than to be out in the creaky ass gate, than to be out in the world talking about world building. And so I'm gonna make, in this quick video, I'm gonna talk about how I think about world building for your novel, and some ways that you can think about it too to help you get started world building, because I know it can be one of those intimidating things. Or maybe you're just one of those people who absolutely loves world building. And don't worry, I'm gonna talk to you too. I'm gonna talk to you too, the perpetual world builder. So first thing about world building is how to think about it in the context of your novel. Because remember, the job of a novel is what? Let me hear you over there. To tell a story, to tell a complete story. Like, think of this video. This video, you see the trees, you see I'm outside, there are the cars passing by, all these other things. But the story, in this case, in this metaphor, is me making this video about world building. That's the metaphor. So I want you to keep that in mind. And in the artist context, they call that figure ground. The figure is the main focus, and the ground is everything else, the background, right? So these have a relationship. That's your world building. It's your sandbox. It's your play area. Because a story without a world it can still be a story, but it's not as effective of a story. You know, imagine Lord of the Rings without Middle Earth. Imagine Harry Potter without Hogwarts, you know, that type of thing. They go together and they feed off each other. They help accentuate and make each other stronger. So that's the first thing, is make sure you always keep that in mind. Because I'm going to talk about now the two types of world builders: overbuilders and underbuilders. Let me talk about overbuilders first. Let me tell a quick story. A couple of nights ago, at this guy's house, and he's a fantasy author, epic fantasy author. And you know how it is with epic fantasy. Ooh, these people like they world building. Maybe that's you. Maybe you're a big world builder. So I asked him, what's your novel about that you've been working on? And he's like, well, we got this many races, and it starts 500 years ago, and these people, they had magic powers, and then the magic got banned, and then they moved over to a place where there was no magic, and then the magic, they thought it was gone, but boom, guess what? It wasn't. There's low-key people using magic, and they ain't supposed to be. So now there's this agency that's after the magic users, and there's this forbidden love plot, and da-da-da-da-da-da. I'm telling you, homie went on for about 20 minutes. No joke. 20 minutes of all about his world. And the world sounded fascinating. He had names, he had made up these creatures, that, you know, he fleshed out all the magic powers. But then I asked him, I said, what's your story about? Like, what's the grounding of the story? And that took up like about 5 minutes, because of course the novel's not done and it's still a work in progress. He's been working on it off and on. Moral of the story. Why do I tell this story? Because this guy had spent so much time building up this world that the story came secondary. And I don't know about you, but have you ever read a book where you can tell the author was just in love with their story or in love with their world, but the story took second place? I have. And the story is usually not very memorable. It's weaker. The characters aren't as strong, because they thought of the world first. They wanted to cram the world into the story instead of the other way around. So that's what I think of overbuilders. At some point, if you are an overbuilder, if you are writing epic fantasy or a mystery, mysteries also have a lot of world building sometimes, then you have to remember that all the contents of the world that you build, all the little animals and, oh, just a second, this is a feature of my world right here. It's supposed to be community watch, and then there's a slit in the fence. I just thought that was so funny. But anyway, all the stuff that you build, the 500 years of lore and the origin story, the prophet who brought down the word of God and let it know to all your creatures and all that shit, that may not make it in the story. It shouldn't make it in the story in some cases, and that's okay. Because I know world builders is kind of like oversharers. You know, you just can't, it's just trying to come out of you and you just can't not share it. But there's other ways to share those details. You could have a novella, you could have some type of supplemental maps or lore book, something like that, to where, okay, here's the backstory, or you could do audio, you could do visuals, you could do video, you could do another media. I'm not going to go into all the nuances, how you can develop your world. The point is, not all of your world has to make it into the actual novel. It should. Because remember, the focus of the novel is, that's right, the story. You know by now. Now, let me talk to y'all world builders, because I'm with you. You with people right here. That was me. You talking to a guy for his first novel, he literally it was an afterthought. I was like, oh shit, where does this take place? I was probably like 3 or 4 chapters in before I actually thought about where is this novel going to take place. Underworld building can be just as bad as overworld building. Why? Because basically you create a story, but it's got no context. Imagine if I was just walking on, I don't know, just walking down the street and there was nothing. There was no signs, there was no trees, there's no nothing around me. There's no traffic. There's no world. There's no place for the story to go. There's nothing that you can allow elements to come in and affect the scenario. And that's what I think is the problem with underworld building. Is that as underworld builders, we can get trapped in our story because we're the writers who get 15, 20 chapters in and we're like, oh shit, I don't know where to go from here. I don't know what to do. Like, what's the next setup? What's the next arc? We get lost because we don't have enough raw material to work with to keep the story fresh, to keep things moving, to expand in other directions, to possibly have a sequel. You know, you can do this with story alone, but it helps if the world propels, lends itself to keep the narrative ongoing, to keep that fuel. So when you're an underworld builder, you got to get your weight up. How do you? So what's the sweet spot? What's the sweet spot? If you don't want to be an overworld builder to where all you think about is world building and you never write. That's another consequence of being an overworld builder. You spend so much time dreaming up this huge world and all these things that you don't write. And then the underworld builder, all they want to do is write, but then they may write themselves into a corner. So you don't want to be either. Here's how I think about world building, and this is going to work just like with all my videos. You got to decide what works for you, what works best for your writing style, your story, your preference, whatever feels right. But this is how I do it. I realized for me early on that the Dungeons and Dragons style world building, where you get the character sheet out, the stats, and here's the trees, here's the enemies, here's the good guys, bad guys, that type of stuff, that doesn't work for me. Because I find myself wanting to cram all that in the story because I spent all this time making it up, right? And I don't want to waste it. Now I'm a fan of just-in-time world building. I just made that up, but what is it? It's essentially, as I'm writing, I'm coming up with elements of the world that fit inside the context. Meaning, I'm taking what I already have and I'm just expanding on it as I write. Let me color this. I'm expanding on it as I write. So that way it feels a lot more free form. I don't feel restricted by what I've already written, by what I've already created. I can just kind of on the fly be like, oh, okay, I need a certain type of technology here, or I want a certain type of element. And don't mistake, a lot of people think world building, they think fantasy. Oh, you've got to come up with all these things. And it's world building can just be regular life too, to where maybe there's a certain law that you introduce that is not a real law, but in your world, this law is important for something, but your whole story is grounded in reality. Maybe you can do that. Point is, I don't fix myself into this particular parameters and get stuck. This has to be in my world. I just kind of go along. Now, the one thing that I make sure to do every time is I gotta have a timeline that, like, basically I want to know, depending on the length of my story and what the context is, I want to know what happened before my story started. So before the story kicks off, what's the circumstances behind what's going on? And this happens in, people texting me as I'm making a video, of course. I want to know what's happening before I actually start writing. Like, and once again, this may be a situation where the reader doesn't need to know, or maybe they need to know later in the context of the story. Maybe you will reveal parts of the world. And this is why it's good to have a good amount of world building, because you can have things going on in the background that the reader isn't privy to, but then you reveal it later to be like, oh, by the way, this was happening off stage, so to speak, and now it's important to the story, so now I'm going to bring it up. That's what good world building allows you to do, and then it makes sense within. Oh man, that's a bad shadow. I'm going to face this way before I made it to the store. I didn't expect to be filming this long, but yeah, I definitely like to get what I call a timeline. Oh, man. Okay, I like that. I think that was a Porsche. But I like to have a timeline leading up to the events of my actual writing. That way, for me at least, I know where I'm going to kick off the writing, and then later on I can join that with whatever I'm going to introduce, plot elements, things like that. Then of course the characters will come in. But that's about it. Everything else I do as I write, and that's how I think about world building. It gives me the flexibility. It doesn't make it too prescriptive. I don't end up with this long ass list of things where I feel like, oh well, I got to put this orc in there now, I got to put this law, I got to make this weather pattern, this piece of technology. No, everything's kind of, the main elements are set up from the outset, but then from there it's whatever I want, and it could be whatever you want too. All right, so that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed my little stroll around my little neighborhood. This was nice to get outside instead of just being, a lot of people do YouTube and stuff. They always film from the same spot. Just be boring all the time. I like to get outside and walk, and it's a nice day. I'm gonna get me some lunch. But hope you enjoyed this video about world building, and I hope it helps you get some clarity about how to build your world for your novel. In the next video, I can't even remember what's next because I don't have my document in front of me, but I think I may start talking about characters, making characters, because that's going to be a huge part, and I'll talk about my process and how I do all that. But all right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.